The Galactic Empire stretched its influence across countless star systems, ruling with an iron grip. Planets that had once been independent now bent the knee or suffered destruction. Among these occupied worlds was Volmara Prime, a once thriving trade hub now patrolled by Imperial warships and crawling with black armored soldiers. On the surface of the planet, within the bustling capital city of Velrose, the people lived in quiet fear. The streets were lined with propaganda banners, bearing the insignia of the Empire, a symbol of absolute control. Every few blocks, patrols of Imperial troopers marched in perfect unison, their faces hidden behind sleek helmets, their weapons always at the ready. The slightest hint of defiance was crushed without hesitation. Yet, beneath the surface, resistance brewed. Alara Voss lived in the heart of the city, running a modest medical supply shop. To most, she was just another citizen, surviving under the Empire's rule. But behind her quiet demeanor, she was much more, a supplier of crucial medical aid to the growing resistance movement. Alara had always been careful. She operated in secrecy, ensuring that the shipments she arranged could never be traced back to her. Medical crates were lost during transport. Supply records were altered. Sick and wounded rebels found sanctuary in hidden backrooms of trusted clinics, thanks to her network. But no matter how cautious she was, the Empire had eyes everywhere. The storm descends. It was late evening when the Imperial soldiers came for her. Alara was locking up her shop, her hands steady as she pulled down the metal shutters. She glanced around the dimly lit street, feeling the usual unease that came with nightfall. The city's once lively energy was now suffocated under the weight of oppression. Shops closed early. People hurried home, avoiding the streets after dark. She turned to leave, only to find herself staring into the cold visor of an Imperial officer. Alara Voss. The voice was sharp and authoritative. Behind the officer, a squad of troopers stood in formation, their weapons already aimed at her. Alara's stomach clenched, but she kept her face neutral. She had trained herself for this moment, knowing it could come at any time. Yes, she replied evenly. The officer stepped forward, his polished boots clicking against the stone pavement. His nameplate read Lieutenant Grant Solvar. She had heard of him, a ruthless enforcer, known for crushing resistance. Cells without mercy. You are under arrest, Solvar declared. By order of the Empire, you are charged with aiding and abetting rebel forces. Surrender now, and your execution will be swift. Alara's pulse quickened, but outwardly, she remained calm. There must be a mistake, she said. I'm just a shopkeeper. I sell medical supplies. That's not a crime. Solvar smirked. You insult my intelligence, Mrs. Voss. We have evidence, supply records, intercepted communications, and the testimony of an informant. An informant? Someone had betrayed her. Alara kept her expression carefully blank, but inside, her mind raced. The resistance was compromised. If they had her records, they could trace her contacts, dismantling everything she had built. She had to act. With a sudden, fluid motion, she lunged sideways, kicking over a crate stacked near the door. The heavy metal container crashed into the nearest trooper, sending him staggering. In the same motion, she reached for the concealed blade hidden beneath her coat. She never got the chance to use it. A powerful force struck her from behind, an electroshock baton slammed into her shoulder. Pain surged through her body like fire, locking her muscles as she crumpled to the ground. Stupid, Solvar muttered as he loomed over her. You should have surrendered. Alara gritted her teeth, her breath ragged. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Cuff her, Solvar ordered. Rough hands yanked her arms behind her back, securing her wrists in energy restraints. The cuffs hummed with a low, pulsing glow, designed to neutralize any resistance by delivering a shock at the first sign of struggle. The street had fallen deathly silent. Bystanders who had witnessed the scene quickly averted their gazes, pretending not to see. No one dared interfere. That was the way of things under the Empire's rule. Alara was dragged to her feet, her body still recovering from the electric jolt. Solvar leaned in close, his expression one of smug satisfaction. "You thought you could defy the Empire," he said softly. "Your rebellion is nothing but a dying ember. We will stamp it out completely." Alara met his gaze with quiet defiance. She knew one truth that he did not: this was far from over. The unseen threat. The Imperial transport carrying Alara cut through the city streets, its red warning lights flashing as it sped toward the high-security prison complex on the outskirts. Inside the vehicle, Alara sat on a cold metal bench, her wrists still bound in the energy cuffs. 2 guards flanked her, their expressions hidden behind their helmets. Her mind worked furiously. 3 days. That's the standard time frame before an execution. The Empire rarely wasted time on trials when dealing with traitors. She could endure 3 days. Because she knew he was coming. Far beyond the Empire's controlled sectors, in the outer reaches of space, her husband, Commander Roran Voss, was engaged in covert warfare. A decorated member of the United Earth Defense Forces, UEDF, Navy SEALs, Roran was more than just a soldier. He was a ghost, a shadow that struck from the darkness and disappeared before the Empire could react. For months, he had been running Black Ops missions against the Empire's supply chains, targeting high-ranking officials and crippling their infrastructure. His name was whispered among Imperial officers. A specter of war they couldn't catch. And now, they had taken his wife. The Empire had no idea the storm they had just unleashed. Alara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, blocking out the hum of the transport's engine. Her hands clenched into fists as she whispered to herself. "He's coming." Ghosts in the dark. Deep in the outer rim, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Empire. The Phantom Spear cruised in the shadows of a desolate asteroid field. The stealth cruiser, designed for covert operations, was nearly invisible to enemy scanners. Within its dimly lit war room, a group of elite warriors gathered around a glowing tactical display. Commander Roran Voss stood at the center, his jaw tight. His blue eyes locked on the intercepted Imperial transmission. The moment he had seen his wife's name in the report, everything else had faded into the background. Alara Voss, detained on Velmara Prime. Charges: high treason. Scheduled for execution in 3 days. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew this day might come. Alara's work with the Resistance was dangerous. But knowing it and experiencing it were 2 very different things. He looked up at his team. The Shadow Wolves, a handpicked unit of the deadliest operatives the UEDF had ever trained. Stealth, sabotage, assassination, these were their specialties. 3 days, Roran said, his voice steady but ice-cold. That's all we have. A soldier to his right, Sergeant Kieran Drax, exhaled sharply. Damn. The Empire just signed its own death warrant. Then let's make sure they pay, Roran said. Here's the plan. Infiltrating the beast. The Phantom Spear slipped into Velmara Prime's orbit under the cover of a meteorological storm. Imperial radars were disrupted by the interference, just as planned. The Shadow Wolves deployed in individual drop pods, streaking through the night sky like falling stars, undetected. They landed in the outskirts of Velrose, moving like wraiths through the city's underbelly, using a combination of forged access codes, EMP devices and silent takedowns. They bypassed security checkpoints with surgical precision. The Imperial prison complex loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of durasteel and gunmetal grey, guarded by automated turrets and heavily armed patrols. The facility was designed to hold high-value prisoners, which meant security was at its peak. But Roran and his team were ghosts. Using cloaking devices and suppressed weaponry, they cut through the perimeter like a scalpel, disabling cameras, jamming communications, and eliminating guards before alarms could be triggered. Reaching the detention block, Roran hacked into the prison system, pulling up Alara's cell location. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as the display flickered, then locked onto the target. Cell 27B, lower level. Solitary confinement. Got her, he whispered. Move. Reunion in chaos. Inside her dimly lit cell, Alara sat with her back against the cold metal wall. her wrists still bound in energy cuffs. Her body ached from the days of interrogation, but her spirit remained unbroken. She had refused to give the Empire anything. Breaking out. The Shadow Wolves had already neutralized most of the guards in the detention block. But Imperial reinforcements were flooding in. As Roran and Alara moved through the corridors, blaster bolts flew past them. They returned fire with precision. Their movements synchronized from years of training and trust. Alara wasn't just a doctor, she had military training, thanks to her husband. A squad of stormtroopers rounded the corner. Roran took down 2 with perfect headshots while Alara dropped to one knee, firing at an officer attempting to activate lockdown protocols. The officer collapsed, the control panel sparking uselessly. "Exits this way," Kieran called through the comms. "We've got company." They reached the outer courtyard just as Lieutenant Solvar stepped into their path, flanked by elite Imperial shock troopers. "Commander Voss," Solvar sneered, his face twisted in hatred. "I should have known." Roran's grip on his rifle tightened. "You made a mistake taking my wife." Solvar smirked, raising his weapon. "And you made a mistake coming here." The standoff lasted half a second before all hell broke loose. Blaster fire erupted in the courtyard. The Shadow Wolves engaged the shock troopers, while Roran and Alara focused on Solvar. The lieutenant was fast, dodging behind cover and firing off precise shots. But Roran was faster. Then, she heard it, the distant sound of blaster fire. Her heart leapt. The sounds grew closer. Explosions rocked the facility. Red emergency lights flared to life as sirens wailed. Then, her cell door exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris, a dark figure emerged, rifle at the ready. For a split second, her breath caught. Roran. He stepped into the room, his face shadowed by the flickering red light, his eyes burning with determination. "Alara," he breathed, relief flooding his expression. She exhaled a shaky laugh. "Took you long enough." He smirked. "You always say that." With a swift motion, he cut her restraints, pulling her to her feet. His hands lingered on her wrists, as if reassuring himself that she was really there. "No time to waste," he said. He handed her a sidearm. "Can you fight?" Alara rolled her shoulders, flexing her sore muscles. "Try and stop me." Roran's smirk widened. "That's my girl." Together, they stepped into the chaos. He surged forward, rolling to avoid enemy fire, and closed the distance. In one fluid motion, he drew his combat knife and plunged it into Solvar's chest. The Imperial officer gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Roran leaned in, voice like steel. "That was for touching my wife." He yanked the blade free, letting Solvar's body drop to the ground. Alara exhaled, shaking off the rush of battle. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." "You never could," Roran said with a smirk. "Let's go." The escape. With the enemy commander dead and the prison in chaos, the Shadow Wolves activated Plan Exodus. A hijacked Imperial transport blasted through the main gates, picking up the team as they sprinted toward extraction. As soon as they were aboard, the ship lifted off, racing toward the upper atmosphere. But the Empire wasn't about to let them escape so easily. "Incoming TIE fighters!" Kieran shouted. Roran sprinted to the turret controls, locking onto the pursuers. The sky lit up with laser fire. But the Phantom Spear suddenly decloaked above them, blasting the enemy ships out of the sky. The transport docked with the stealth cruiser, and within seconds, they jumped to hyperspace. The moment they were safely away, Roran turned to Alara, his hands cupping her face. "Never again," he whispered. She smiled, resting her forehead against his. "You always keep your promises." He kissed her deeply, pouring all his relief, love, and fury into that single moment. The war wasn't over. The Empire still ruled. But as long as they had each other, they would never stop fighting.